Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we discuss the subject of grooming gangs as a network of Sikh organisations in the UK write to the Home Secretary demanding they investigate the clearly uncomfortable truth about its origin. And under the complex quirks of religio-political dynamics, we find how Sikhs find themselves strangely aligned with Indian right-wing extremists in this regard. At the same time, we look again at the British government's recent report on extremism that not only recognised Hindutva as extremism, but also mentioned Khalistanis in the same breath, but with subtly different language. Just what is the British government up to, and what is the hidden agenda? We also continue our look at the findings of Canada's Foreign Interference Enquiry. And with the shocking entrance of DeepSeek into the AI market from China, what does this mean for the fight against misinformation? And finally, we take a look at how the Khalistan movement has grown up into a global legal entity, now able to take the formal steps necessary to establish the new Sikh sovereign homeland. Well, all this and more on today's show, but joining me as always is our correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. Thanks for the amazing comments, all of the serious ones and the few that made us laugh. Keep the comments rolling in. We love reading them. Thank you for joining us once again for Perspectives.
Indeed, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And we will indeed, of course, be taking our usual look at your comments at the end of the show, so do keep tuned for that. Right, James, let's get the show underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
We touched last night, Angus, on the Foreign Interference Enquiry report, and that, some are saying, has not gone far enough. Now, it has left some people feeling a little left out and others just with more questions. Now, when we look at the report, it did not give actual names or, the parties directly about instances of foreign interference and which MPs were involved. Now, it does give some information to kind of hint around the issue, but it has left a lot of people feeling that it just did not go far enough. And I think that in part is because this was directed towards, as we spoke last night of, towards the foreign interference when it comes to the integrity of Canadian elections and the electoral process. However, a lot of people are still feeling unsafe and uncomfortable in the fact that it didn't go far enough to address or to investigate the transnational repression issue that is quite real in Canada, not only within the Sikh diaspora, but the diasporas far and wide across our country. Now, here is a report that the CBC did a couple of months ago that still raises, or still is just as resonating today as it was then. And it has to do with the Iranian individuals, especially women in Canada, who feel targeted. And this has really come up again with this the release of the report, and these individuals, among others, feeling that the report, as I said, did not go far enough to address this issue.
An alleged Iranian-backed plot to assassinate former Canadian Justice Minister Irwin Cotler.
The RCMP told Cotler last month of an Iranian...
When news broke that Canada's former Justice Minister was the target of an assassination plot by Iran,
I was under imminent and lethal threat.
Irwin Cotler made it clear he's not alone and he's worried.
The targeting of dissidents and journalists and human rights defenders.
He's worried about people who came here to be safe, only to be suddenly stalked by the repressive regimes they left behind.
Do you think now that you're safe in Canada?
I feel sometimes when, a car behind us, I feel I'm not safe.
It feels like everything we do are being watched.
Turns out the worry is building.
How can we coordinate between like-minded countries to deal with this?
A parliamentary committee on the terrifyingly real phenomenon known as transnational repression has been hearing tales of people feeling increasingly threatened and powerless to do anything about it.
If you could help us define transnational repression.
Just as curious about how to handle this, it seems, the Canadian government.
What more can be done to ensure the safety of women political activists and human rights defenders?
The subcommittee will meet again in the new year, but it's already clear intimidation is increasing in Canada and women are a particular target.
I receive lots of threats. I'm very scared.
This woman certainly is.
What kind of threats?
They will kill me. They will kill my daughter.
They knew you had a daughter.
Azi Jangravi, in Canada now after taking an enormous risk in Iran.
The girls, plural, of Revolution Street are all over social media.
Back in 2018, we did a story about the women known as the Girls of Revolution Street.
4 girls did this.
Were you one of the 4?
Yeah, I was the third.
Single displays of defiance.
Young Iranian women who stood on utility boxes and boldly took off their hijabs. Precisely what Azi Jangravi did.
This is you.
Yeah, this is me.
One by one, the women were arrested, their families pushed to say publicly they were mentally unwell. Jangravi's family refused, and at the first opportunity, she fled the country, eventually coming to Canada.
So as we can see, it is a far and wide issue. It doesn't just impact the Indian nationals or Indian Canadians, Sikh Canadians. It doesn't just impact the Chinese Canadians, which is a lot of what we hear. But again, what we hear in the media is only a very small proportion to the number of people that are feeling threatened, that are feeling as though they are being watched or even intimidated by foreign governments or their agents. And this continues to be an issue that some feel was overlooked or just not delved into far enough with this report. Now, here the CBC also reported just yesterday with the release of the report is that they say the problem with the report is that Hogue interviewed NSICOP or the NICECOP report, and that it does not name individual parliamentarians. It does make strongly worded and unequivocal stated allegations against individual parliamentarians. But again, it doesn't name directly the instances or the proof or evidence there of directly linking those parliamentarians, and that seems to be a concern. Now, as we continue to look at the report, as I said, it is thousands of pages, so I am still sifting through a lot of it, and we'll have more reports following up on the issue. But again, looking overall at the report in itself, it is quite substantial in terms of the resources and the number of people and documents and all of that was reviewed in that overall process. So to give you some idea as to what was all involved, or the summary of numbers, so to speak, we can take a look here at the points on the fact sheet that was released with the report. And this here shows that they are very much, or they were very much involved in talking to a lot of the people that have the information, and that they did take the election portion seriously. Now, Elizabeth May, who is the federal Green leader of the Green Party, has come out and said that she would like to see Parliament recalled and actually address these issues prior to the 2025 election call. Now, we do know that Parliament is closed down until March, when a new leader of the Liberal Party is expected to be named, and then at which time, of course, we expect that an election will be called shortly thereafter. But in the meantime, it's important to note that that Trudeau is still doing business. The government is still working on the defense of potential tariffs coming up on Saturday from the United States. We have also a new nuclear power agreement in place with other nations that Trudeau has just entered into. So it's not something that is being overlooked or brushed aside. But without having a Parliament sitting, it definitely creates an issue when it comes to dealing with it and making changes prior to an election call. But at the same time, this could be an excuse once Parliament is recalled in March. It could be an excuse to push the election off even further for the Liberals in hopes of regaining some of the territory lost, which I think might benefit the NDP and Jagmeet Singh because of the fact that the Conservative Party of Canada, under the leadership of Pierre Poilievre, has taken a significant nosedive recently. And I think that people are really getting tired of his one-liners and his little quips without actually responding to the issues at hand that are facing Canadians and the challenges and how he plans to move the country forward. Instead, he is taking to immature name-calling and insulting people and just really showing a level of arrogance that I think has worn short and worn bare on the Canadian public. And that's going to have, I think, a huge impact if he doesn't start facing the cameras and giving actual plans to move the country forward. So let's take a look at the Interference Commission by numbers. And the participants that were granted standing were 27. The council was 22 people involved there. Witnesses and parties and legal representation was 70. And the number of Commission Research Council was 4. But let's jump down to the important numbers here. And the number of hours of webcasting, so the live processing or the live airing of the sessions that were allowed to be televised or streamed, you're looking at 276, and 256 was the actual accredited number of media that were present. So there were, as you can see, a lot of eyes on the entire process and reports coming out there for bringing accountability and transparency to the report, which I think is very important. But once again, people feel that now it's very instrumental in moving forward to create a panel and an inquiry into the transnational repression, which continues to be a very big concern, especially in light that Canadians are well aware of it happening in the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and then threats and potential other crimes that have been instituted in Canada against the Sikh diaspora, but others as well that don't get as much play in the media. So it's very important to keep in mind that the documents that they went through, as you can see on the screen, was in around 47,000 documents that were reviewed. And, the number of documents received from other participants and sources was in around 5,000. The number of reports and evidence in the Commission website was 12. So we need to keep in mind that this document and this report, if you are interested in actually reviewing it, is available in the Government of Canada website and the Commission website. So you can go there and download it. It's actually in 7 volumes, plus different amendments and different editions. So that is quite lengthy and something that is definitely worth taking a look at. You can look at just the summary and get the overall information, or you can take the time to read the full report. And as I said, I'm still shoveling through the mass amounts of information, Angus. And it's still a lot of information to come here. And we'll see what happens when the impact hits not only Canada, but the international areas, such as maybe in the UK, Angus, they may be looking at an enhanced report like this there.
Yeah, who knows? I'd be surprised, though, our respective government, when I say respective, our previous Conservative and now Labour governments sort of seem to be relatively disinterested in this sort of area. I often ask that question, why? Just what is the agenda there? Which actually we'll talk about in a moment. I think looking through the overall, I would say, press reaction to the release of this report, obviously it's a huge report, there's a huge amount of information in there, and people are still trying to work out, okay, what actually is it saying? I think there are no headlining massive impact hits from this report. And I think my interpretation then, looking at the bigger picture here, is that there's something going on, but it's quite subtle, and there's no smoking gun as such, but there is influence definitely happening. There is influence coming from, obviously, China, Russia, but India is still named as the second highest threat to Canada. So the fact that it is named very specifically, and it is the second highest threat in itself, I think speaks volumes. But as I said, I think the struggle to find the smoking gun, but there is an awful lot of wisps of smoke, should we say, everywhere. And it's very hard then to sort of actually find that one piece of damning definite evidence that they can lay out and say, here is what they're doing. I think it's very clear that the influence that India has been exerting is subtle. It's very broad, it's very subtle, but it is nonetheless powerful. But it's very hard to pin it down, to pin, as I say, one piece of evidence. It's just very broad. And of course, the parameters of this inquiry were so small, so tight. But of course, this transnational repression occurs right across all the other areas, as we discussed yesterday, whether it's academia, whether it's in industry, whether it's in science, etc., etc. But what I have noticed, and of course, a lot of the Sikh organisations have jumped on this, unsurprisingly, and sort of cherry-picked lots of highlights that they broadcast across their various news outlets. And the World Sikh Organization, for example, jumped out and said, look, this report has clearly stated India is the second most active state, that it has provided illicit financial support to various Canadian politicians to secure the election of pro-Indian candidates. Its use of proxies, clandestine tactics to undermine support for Sikh advocacy. It's using cognitive warfare techniques to target the Khalistan narrative, and it's etc. etc. So what it has done is it's used very, very clear, unambiguous language. It's gone into the report into lots of ambiguous language, and it's actually sort of spun that around into very clear, unambiguous statements saying, look, this is what India is up to. So it's very hard to actually sort of work out what actually is being said. But I say the Sikh organisations have made their interpretations. But interesting, James, see what you make of it yourself. But what I do notice from all of this is there does seem to be a much more united, much more powerful movement now demanding a greater investigation into the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, obviously in the light of this report, which one wonders if it's almost deliberately obfuscated the whole platform of all this, because there's such a broad brush of, well, information. I won't call it evidence. There's such an enormous platform, an enormous breadth of information that tends to be obscuring and maybe deliberately obfuscating the truth, what actually is going on. This is why actually we do need a more clear investigation into the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. We do need the intelligence services to be more open about what actually has gone on beneath the surface and what are the links to India, because that's really what this is all about. What actually has India and through its RAW, through its intelligence proxies, through its criminal proxies, what have they been up to in Canada, and not just Canada, of course, North America and Europe? What have they been up to? That's what we really want to know. And this report that's been released is just as I say, it's a very high level, very broad discussion. Despite its narrow parameters, it's still a very broad discussion about something that we need to know a lot more finite detail. We need to know the hard truth, the hard facts. What has India been up to, James? And I think I'm worried that this report is actually brushing over that.
Well, and I also think, Angus, though, that we got to keep in mind that, again, this report was focused on the integrity and interference relating to the electoral system in Canada. And I think that in some ways we wanted to see a lot more about the foreign interference and the transnational repression, when really that's not the focus of the report, but it just shows even deeper the need for the more enhanced report to happen and more information to come out on the transnational repression, including the assassination of Shahid Hardeep Singh Nijjar. With that, we also have to keep in mind that the case is still moving forward against the 4 individuals accused, and that includes the next appearance here just in a few weeks away, and it has been moved to the higher courts in British Columbia. So it's actually moved from the city of Surrey to the city of New Westminster, and a much bigger courthouse. I think that they will probably need that because of the level of interest, and that's not only from the local community, but the international community as a whole. And the media, I think, is going to be a circus around this event in terms of the implications not only here in Canada, but also in the US and around the world. So it is definitely something that is needed. And I think a lot of people feel let down in that it wasn't a part of this report. But again, I think with the next parliament being brought in, or the next government brought in, I think there's going to be a lot of focus and a lot of pressure for them to move forward with not only investigating transnational repression at a much deeper scale, but also more transparency so that the Canadian public knows exactly what is being investigated, what information is available, and then also they can allude to, or at least state that there is further information, but it cannot be released, given not only the Najjar trial for his murder, but other instances and other cases that are going on right now, as well as ones that are still pending in the investigation status. So I think that there's a delicate balance there, and that is where we're at with the whole process. And with that said, of course, the big thing is that they addressed the use and influence of not only the bots and the different social media platforms, but AI. And AI is very powerful in the new world. And I say that as a technological term, or technology-based term, is that things have changed and the whole technical infrastructure has been turned on its head, not only with the homegrown advancements of AI, but the recent announcements, not only by the DeepSeek program that's come out of China, but now India is also making claims to having an AI program and system that is far advanced, more so than China's. Now, we know that there may have been strategic reasons for the release of this information by China in this huge announcement, in that the Trump government just days prior had announced trillions of dollars of potential investment into AI infrastructure in the US, research and programming. And then all of a sudden, China comes out with this big announcement and a firecracker of one, and that actually shaved off close to $1 trillion in valuation on the U.S. markets within that one day. So the implications of AI are very much a part of the economy as a whole. And even the people that are utilizing or programming and teaching AI systems are concerned that it may get even further out of hand when it comes to the use in foreign interference and transnational repression, for the simple fact that there are a lot of regulatory restrictions that are not yet being looked at, and also the ethics and responsible use of AI policy and procedures by governments has not caught up to the technology, and that is a big concern. Now, keeping in mind that the AI technology is open to data bias and hallucinations and other such concerns as well. And now hallucinations are essentially when the AI system does not have relevant facts or actual real life facts. It can just pull things out of the air and create its own interpretation or its own policy. Now, Air Canada saw an issue of this with their ChatGPT, in people asking for certain clarification on company policies when it came to refunds and guarantees of purchases, things like that. And there was no policy in place, but the ChatGPT made one up. And then, of course, the company was held to account for it. They were dragged into court. It was just a chaotic mess. So there is the data bias where people can actually feed the wrong information into the system to give it a warped sense of the truth of data. So let's take a look here. IBM has a very interesting set of videos on their website when it comes to AI, as do other companies such as OpenAI and others, that I really encourage you to check out, because of the fact that it brings a lot of light on the not only benefits of AI, but the risks, especially when it comes to foreign governments using it to influence the world. And when you're using the AI systems, and I challenge the viewers to do this, go into whether it's Gemini or Grok on X, and just play with it. Ask it a question. When it comes back with information and the answer, then type in, "Are you sure?" and watch how the answers change. And it could be the polar opposite of the original answer. And again, this is a very serious concern when it comes to the use of AI and the ongoing influence that it's going to play in society. We know of lawyers that have been caught using AI that have, again, hallucinations. This system created citations for certain cases that were absolutely not even real. And they got caught on that, and there was very harsh penalties. But it's also a risk of people not understanding the technology in itself.
Kush, what's going on with these chatbot responses here? Some of these are right, and some of them are complete fiction. What's going on?
So I would call that hallucination. And so that means that these AI systems, they'll make some things up, they'll make associations that aren't exactly correct. And I think that's what happened in our last example. So it kind of created this association that didn't exactly exist.
Got it. I think everyone is feeling the pressure of operationalizing generative AI as fast as possible. But when companies hear about AI hallucinating or other toxic behaviors like bullying or gaslighting, and there's other concerns around generative AI and copyright infringements or the revealing of personal or private information. And it makes companies concerned and nervous and even fearful about adopting generative AI in their organization.
Yeah, and what we have to remember is that AI is not a race. It's a journey. We have to be careful. And as anything that we want to get into enterprise AI, it has to have these principles of trust and transparency throughout. We have to slow down, put in all of these governance aspects, make sure that we're putting in safeguards, guardrails, and just doing the right thing.
I know you and your team have worked on this for a while, right? How have the risks changed with the advent of generative AI compared to the risks we were seeing before with traditional machine learning?
Yeah, so predictive machine learning and generative AI, they're kind of two sides of the same coin. So a lot of the techniques are very similar, but there are differences. So the hallucination that you mentioned, the leakage of private information, the bullying, all of those are new risks that we haven't seen before. We still have a lot of other risks as well that kind of carry over. But the difference mainly is around the solutions. How do we address these issues? And a lot of the reason we can't apply the same techniques from before is because of the huge data that we're dealing with now. It's just humongous data sets.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about that specifically? So when we have these huge volumes of data, how does that impact our ability to trust a model?
Yeah, the data is so huge. We can put in data governance techniques. We can ensure that certain sites are not scraped, that certain filtering is done and so forth. But it's beyond the ability of any individual human or a team of humans to even read through every single piece of content. So that's where the challenge comes from.
So there you go. It's a challenge because we can't fully monitor what is being created by AI and the levels and volumes of data, once again, that it's bringing out in just astronomical speeds is just crazy. And it brings to light a very important case that happened here actually in British Columbia just a few months ago that we reported on with the Canadian Border Services agent, where he was accused of being an agent and going against India, but they also went as far as to put his home address on the internet, and whether that was through an AI use or it was very intentional and deliberate by the agents of India, whether it was RAW or the RSS, it shows that the risk to public safety and to data safety of individuals and your personal information is highly at risk, and it's only going to go get worse as transnational repression and foreign interference really encompasses the power and the strength of the AI systems, Angus.
Yeah, AI is a bit like the internet. It's an incredibly wonderful thing, but at the same time, it's also an incredibly dangerous thing. It just depends who controls it and what comes out of it. As I understand AI models, essentially their answers are based on information that they have trawled and collated from the internet. This internet is just the world's largest ever in history database of all known knowledge that humanity has accumulated over its entire existence. It's an incredible thing, the internet. I mean, you can literally, every piece of knowledge that humanity has ever learned is somewhere out there on the internet. It's an amazing thing. But the question is then, these AI models that you ask it a question, it gives an answer. They all obviously trawl that database. They create their own database based on what they've read from the internet and then interpret it in their own way that they have been programmed to interpret it. So one of the arguments, this DeepSeek that hit the market only a few days ago from China, there has been already accusations saying, well, look, some of its answers are already showing a very clear pro-China bias. If you ask it about Taiwan, for example, it gives a very prejudiced answer, saying Taiwan has always been part of China, blah, 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 whatever. And it's a very Chinese interpretation. Likewise, if you ask it about Tibet, again, it gives a very Chinese-centric perspective on the situation of Tibet. So again, it raises all sorts of questions. Well, what is the truth? And the truth is, well, the truth is, according to AI, it's whoever's programmed it. And this is where the dangers of misinformation come in. I think one angle which I found particularly amusing on this was of course, the Western tech giants who've obviously all taken a very sharp intake of breath in a moment of shock that this young upstart, or relatively young upstart from China, has basically beat them at their own game. He's done it for a fraction of the cost. I think where $100 million worth of equipment or hardware was needed to create, the Chat GPT, whatever it's called, he did it for $6 million. Apparently, he's used old-fashioned, old-style NVIDIA chips, which went out of fashion years ago. And this again highlights that one of the dangers that the Western world often falls into, this trap, where when it sanctions countries like Iran or Russia or whatever for whatever their activities they disagree with, these countries then go away and say, right, fine, okay, we'll make the most of what we've got. And of course, there are lots of clever people in these countries. Iran, Russia have actually, for example, created incredible technologies, incredible engineering based on old-fashioned ideals, or they just found ways to generate their own. So sanctions, all they achieve is actually they teach these countries to generate their own creations. They generate their own ways of doing it, which quite often, as in the case of DeepSeek, is actually better than the West was offering in the first place. So it's actually a very dangerous thing to do. So one of the ironies and one of the things that actually made me chuckle was when the Western tech giants came out in the press saying, oh, this Chinese DeepSeek, think of all that personal data that it's sucking back into China. All this data that it's taking from your devices is now ending up on Chinese data servers. Is that really good? Well, my answer to that is, well, what do you think Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all the Western versions of this have been doing? They've been doing exactly the same, sucking up our personal data into their data servers for use for who knows what. And again, I only need to say that I only need to sort of talk about something in a private conversation, and a few hours later it'll appear as an advert on my Facebook page. So the hypocrisy there actually runs really deep. But the real crux of this story, James, is, what danger does this pose to us going forward? As I said at the beginning, AI is a wonderful thing, but it is also a very dangerous thing. And of course, it does provide this platform that can be very influential. If it is regurgitating propaganda and packaging it up into some sort of new form of truth, this is the new truth, that's dangerous. That is not the truth. That is it's just used old news, old propaganda, and regurgitated, repackaged it into a new truth. It is not actually a genuinely researched piece of information, or its sources are not reliable. And that's the dangers of this, James. And that is why we still need, let's say, news outlets and people like us. One day we will probably be replaced by AI avatars regurgitating propaganda. But this is why, more than ever, people like us and all the outlets like us, of real people doing real research, trying to get the real truth out there, that's why there must always be a place for people like us just to combat and provide a counter-narrative to what will become, obviously, the mainstream information outlets. That will be these AI outlets, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And just to show how it works, while you were talking there, I just typed into Gemini perspectives on Satellite TV, and this is what it came up with. And of course, it says we focus on good news and inspiration. Satellite TV emphasizes positive stories and content that promotes hope, peace, justice, and inclusion. This is a refreshing approach compared to many mainstream media outlets that often focus on negative news. So, hey, I'll take that response any day. Angus, how about you?
I think my answer to that, James, is I take back everything I've said. I've obviously talked utter nonsense. I think AI is absolutely truthful in everything it said, and you should believe everything it says. Hypocrite, moi.
That's right.
Well, there you go. All right, James, let's move on then, and I'll move on to my first story then. Let's get a bit more serious now. Right, here in the UK, we've talked a lot about the grooming gangs scandal. And of course, the Sikh community have been on this story for a very long time. And the network of Sikh organisations here in the UK has actually just written a very powerful letter a few days ago to our Home Secretary about this, because the government, the Labour government, have been very, I would say, reluctant to launch a public inquiry into the grooming gangs scandal here in the UK. And for those who might not be aware of it from overseas, basically Muslim gangs have been targeting, for many years, have been targeting young girls of all ethnicities and grooming them for sex and raping underage girls. It's a terrible scandal, and but unfortunately the British government and the law enforcement have turned a blind eye for decades because they feared the accusations of racism, so they deliberately turned a blind eye to this. And momentum publicly has gathered in over really the last year to saying, look, this has got to stop, we've got to do something about this. You can't keep burying this story. And Keir Starmer himself has been under enormous pressure because he was the public prosecutor. He was the public prosecutor at the time when the scandal was really taking hold, and he has been accused of himself taking a blind eye or turning a blind eye to it. And now he's the Prime Minister. The public has now launched this huge wave against him, saying you've got to launch a proper, detailed public inquiry. And the network of Sikh organisations has joined this clamour for a detailed public inquiry. And they wrote this letter. Now, first of all, for those who may not know, the network of Sikh organisations is an umbrella body for Sikhs here in the UK to promote a better understanding of the Sikh faith in the UK and to promote interfaith understanding. So it involves what they get up to is talks and lectures, and they use broadcast, print and internet media to spread their message. So they've written this letter, and I'll just read a few elements of this letter, just again to give you a bit of context what they're trying to say. They said, look, we're encouraged to hear the steps the government is taking to address this issue of grooming gangs, and it shows that the government's commitment in looking to address a national shame and what is now regrettably an intergenerational scandal. But the proposals fall short of a statutory national inquiry, which should have far more powers. They say, although much of the focus on victims has rightly been those from vulnerable white working class communities, we want to highlight how this stain on British society has long impacted the Sikh and Hindu community too. Indeed, the targeting of Sikh girls was the subject of a BBC documentary. One victim, Jaswinder, was 13 when she was targeted, ending up in a cycle of abuse for 18 months. The man who groomed her into prostitution was wearing Sikh symbols like the Kara, the bracelet, hoodwinking her into a relationship. This process has some parallels with the Loverboy crime model in Holland, where men of predominantly Muslim heritage target Dutch girls in the same way. Another victim, Nurpreet, was duped by a man from the Muslim community who gave the impression he also was a Sikh by wearing a Kara. He participated in a Sikh Nagar Kirtan, a religious street procession, where he initially contacted the victim. Even a former member of a grooming gang admitted men pretend to be Sikhs, and Sikh girls are viewed as easy targets due to matters of honour and shame within the community. A 2013 case in Leicester resulted in the conviction of men who exploited a Sikh girl again. The majority jailed had Muslim names. And the letter goes on, asking the Home Secretary, saying, look, this all points not only to cultural drivers, but also religious and racial drivers. This is the key point. To fully understand the reasons why perpetrators target vulnerable girls from all communities, Baroness Casey's rapid audit must be bold enough to address all factors when it comes to the motivations behind these gangs. We need only look at the appalling treatment of girls from the minority faiths in Pakistan, obviously a predominantly Muslim country, where Christian, Hindu and Sikh girls are kidnapped, forced to convert to Islam and married to get an understanding of the underlying motivation. So again, it's very clear in this letter where the finger of guilt is pointing to. We urge you to do the right thing by extending the remit of the rapid audit to include race and religion as contributing factors in these crimes. We acknowledge there are various factors, but we cannot shy away from the irrefutable truth that the non-Muslim girls are considered fair game by some perpetrators by virtue of the fact they are kuffars, that's a derogatory term that Muslims use for non-Muslims. Until we are honest about this admittedly uncomfortable factor, we will be no further forward in addressing cases which involve racially and religiously motivated targeting of vulnerable girls from all our communities. Now, this enters into a very dangerous area, and this is the reason why it's become so controversial here in the UK. It's very clear the perpetrators of this crime, it comes from the Islamic community, and that's the problem. Obviously, we cannot paint all the Muslim community with the same brush. And likewise, we have this problem with extremism, violent extremism and terrorism. Again, we can't paint the whole Muslim community with the same brush. But there is an element of the Islamic community here in the UK and overseas, as it turns out, that are guilty of these crimes, of the grooming gangs, grooming young girls, and likewise terrorist and extremist operations. The problem here is, here in the UK, for some reason, we have been reluctant to investigate this. And this is why the Sikh organisations have had to stand up and say, look, you cannot keep turning a blind eye to this. You have got to broaden the parameters of this investigation to look at the religious links to this. There is a religious element to this, and it unfortunately comes from the Islamic population. And until you address that uncomfortable truth, you will never get to the bottom of this. You will never basically stop it happening. So this is a really, really powerful letter, and it starts to encroach into very uncomfortable territory for the British government. Now, with this in mind, I'm going to jump across into a slightly different story and something we touched on before. And I'll circle back to this, and you'll see why I'm going to do this. But this starts, unfortunately, introducing these complexities I talked about in the introduction. There are some weird complexities and quirks about this story. Now, the Times of India talked about this leaked report. Remember yesterday, for those who watched yesterday's show, I talked about this leaked report that identified elements of extremism here in the UK, extremist threats. It did highlight one of the highest extremist threats here in the UK is Indian right-wing nationalist extremism, Hindutva. It specifically identified Hindutva as a danger. At last, finally, the British government has woken up to the fact that the right-wing extremists in India, Hindutva, are a genuine and present danger to British society, and not least the Sikh population. So the Times of India they covered this same story, unsurprisingly, as did much of the Indian press. But they said Hindu nationalism and pro-Khalistan extremism are featured as new threats of extremism in Britain in this report. Unsurprisingly, the Indian Govt media jumped on this, saying, look, it's the Khalistani extremists again. Yeah, here we go again. This sprint, as they refer to it, devotes 2 pages to 2 types of extremism which have their origins in India. PKE, that's the pro-Khalistani extremism, and Hindu nationalist extremism, Hindutva. Given the violence which occurred in Leicester in 2022 between Hindus and Muslims, the government is correct to place Hindu nationalist extremism under the spotlight, not least as knowledge of it is generally low. And it was a mistake not to have included Hindu nationalism in the Prevent review of 2023. So well done to actually the Times of India. It does actually acknowledge this threat of Hindutva, finally. With regard to PKE, this is interesting. This is an interesting angle on this out of this report. The Sprint offers the caveat that support for Sikh state of Khalistan is not necessarily extremist. The problem is when this outlook leads to the advocacy of violence in support of that cause. This is an interesting use of language. So this report, although it called Khalistan extremism, it actually said is not necessarily extremist. It's only a problem when it leads to the advocacy of violence in support of that cause. Now, what does that actually mean? It's actually meaningless. It means if you stand up for something, that could potentially lead on to extremists jumping on that and using it. So what actually it's saying is that the Khalistan support is not extremism, but it could potentially lead on to people using that as a reason to be extremist, which is such a mischievous use of language. And again, and I'm saying this because this points to the authors of this report. What is your agenda? Why did you bring the subject of pro-Khalistan into a report about extremism? What you've actually said is you admit that Khalistan support in itself is not extremism, but it could somehow lead to extremism, but it's not actually extremism. So in other words, you're actually deliberately bringing the Khalistan movement into a report about extremism, even though you have to admit it's not really extremism. Why? Once again, it points to the British government deliberately trying to paint the Khalistan movement as extremists. Why? Now, I've brought this up because it also points to other things. Let me just continue. The sprint refers to a growing portfolio of actors of concern within the Khalistan movement, refers to activism which contributes to the demonisation of Muslim communities, in particular in relation to child sexual exploitation allegations. What are seen as conspiracy theories alleging collusion between the British and Indian governments. The sprint does, however, recognise concerns exist about the Indian government's overseas roles, including assassinations, etc., etc. Now, interesting. First of all, we have this report deliberately targeting the Khalistan movement with very spurious reasons. But it also says, look, this Khalistan movement is deliberately exploiting the child sexual allegations. In other words, why the Khalistan movement is a danger to the Muslim population because they are deliberately pointing a finger at the grooming gangs within the Muslim population. Now, this is where it starts becoming a bit nuanced and a bit complex and a bit subtle. But basically, what's happening here? The Sikh community have, for decades, been warning the British government that there is an element, a section of Islamic society that is grooming children. The British government have ignored them. Weirdly, as I said in the introduction, this is now aligning the Sikh community with the far right in India. The far right in India are vehemently anti-Muslim. They hate the Muslims. They are forever pointing out the Muslims and the danger that the Islamic population is to Hindu imperialism, to the world in general, in fact. There is a very anti-Islamic agenda from the Hindu far right in India, and likewise spreading across the diaspora. So this is where, weirdly, the Sikh community is sitting actually in alignment with the Hindu right wing. Weird, isn't it? But yeah, but of course they are both aligned against this extremist, this criminal, disgusting activity of this element of Islamic society. However, and this is where it starts getting weird, the British government has been seen to be protecting this population, protecting the Muslim population and protecting this element of the Islamic population, this criminal element. Why? Why has the British government been deliberately obfuscating, I use that word again, deliberately burying the evidence, trying to prevent investigations into the Islamic population? Firstly, about terrorism and extremism. Secondly, about the grooming gangs. There is this weird agenda. Now, we do know that the Muslim population here in the UK is extraordinarily powerful. It's got a very powerful political voice, a very powerful voice in Parliament. It's now known, the UK is now known as the largest centre of Sharia law outside of Pakistan, for example. So we have a very powerful Muslim population. That Muslim population clearly has a very powerful influence on the British government, both Conservative and Labour. That is where, weirdly, the Sikh population, the Sikh community, and the right wing of India are strangely aligned. They are both calling out the British government. Why are you protecting these people? What is your agenda? So you can see, James, this whole story starts to get a little bit weird and it has all these weird nuances where suddenly our enemies are having to sit side by side and calling out their mutual enemies. So as I say, and again, coming full circle back to this whole story of grooming gangs, there's an awful lot going on here. And again, it always comes back to this question: what is the British government hiding? Why are they so reluctant to investigate the grooming gangs? Why are they so protective of the Islamic community here in the UK? And I'll just caveat this by saying we have nothing against the general Islamic community here in the UK. It is a small section of that community that is guilty of disgusting criminal offences, but they are being protected ultimately by the British government. Why, James? I don't know, but all we can do is just highlight the facts.
Absolutely, Angus. And I mean, for those who may not know the history there that are joining our program to learn about it, you can go back to the Sikh Empire. You can go back to partition of 1947. The split between the Hindus and the Muslims has been there for many decades, and that is also to say that there's been that same split between the Muslims and the Sikh community. And that is something for our non-Sikh viewers to understand, is that Sikhism is not Hinduism. It is completely separate and polar opposites in a lot of the beliefs and the culture and the history. So that's very important to note, that the struggle between exposure of those deeds, especially when it comes to the grooming gangs, should be something that all sides can agree on to investigate, to also hold the governments, whether that is the British government, the Pakistan government, the India government, to hold all governments to account when it comes to the exploitation of these young girls. And with that, I mean, with reports coming out with Keir Starmer, he alleges, sorry about that. So he alleges that he has one of the highest prosecution rates when he was in the public prosecution or the Crown Prosecution Office when it came to the grooming gangs. But if that is the case that he holds that so dear to battle against, then why is he not moving it forward even more to create this investigation into more in-depth information on the grooming gangs, the people involved, and to really get a full picture of it, not only for government and investigators, but also for the general public, because it's something that we talk about quite a bit, Angus, is whether it's youth violence, whether it is sexual assault, all of these things. The more information the public has, the better the information and education and awareness is, then of course the further you get in advancing the end of the problem, Angus.
Indeed, and Keir Starmer clearly is trying to hide something. He was the Director of Public Prosecutions when this scandal really was at its height, and his critics are now saying the reason you are stalling an investigation is because you're trying to cover up your own guilt in this, your own failures in this, and that really is what it's all about. And I'll just finish this story with one final sentence from actually the Times of India's report. They actually said, "The sprint decenters and downplays Islamism, by far the greatest threat to national security." They add, pointing out it gets just one page. So in this entire report, what it actually admitted that the greatest threat of extremism in the UK does come from Islamism. They dedicated just one page to Islamism. The rest of it was dedicated to the Hindutva and the Khalistan movement. Go figure. Very suspicious, James, very suspicious. So, as I said, it's a strange alignment here between the Sikh community and the far right of India. Stranger things have happened indeed. So, okay, let me move on as we're running out of time, as always, sadly. My second story, I'll quickly whip through this. And Baz News actually wrote about this story, and this is something that we talked a lot about, and I think the Baz News story, that their take on this really just is a great frame, a great summary really just to use to discuss this topic. And this is, and I've often talked about the Sikh Federation International, who coalesced into an organisation deliberately designed to unite the Sikh voice around the world. So it can take forward the Khalistan movement on a more legal basis, on a more formal basis. It unites all the various organisations into one entity that can then approach organisations like the United Nations, etc. Because to become a sovereign nation of Khalistan, it has to go through certain legal steps. But it can only do that if it approaches the process as one united legal entity. In other words, it's one entity that can sign the various documents. It is as practical as that. And so that is where the Sikh Federation International comes into play. Now, Baz News They said recent success in getting, for example, this wonderful report that was written by the United Nations Human Rights Commission to acknowledge India's transnational repression of Sikhs marks a crucial step towards proactively internationalising the politics of the Khalistan struggle. And in October last year, the Sikh Federation International was at last formalised, as we reported at the time, with the explicit aim of restoring Khalsa Ji Kebal Bala, Sikh sovereignty in the current world order. But in order to achieve this, the Sikh Federation International set out to engage in diplomacy and advocacy to support the establishment of Khalistan. The Federation's recent success in getting this report about India's transnational repression marks a crucial step towards proactively internationalising the politics of our struggle rather than simply reacting to the actions of others around us, reducing our Sangharsh, our struggle, to a series of human rights violations, which is actually what it's been. It's just sporadic sort of organisations just jumping up individually saying, look, you can't do this, but that in itself is not achieving anything. That's not taking things forward. So this is what this is all about. It's uniting all this into one voice saying, look, we've got to, as one, bring this forward and make change. So when the SFI was established, we set our objectives to develop internal panthic capacity while simultaneously establishing effective mechanisms of global advocacy. Again, it's all about uniting that voice. We set out to combat India's ongoing transnational repression and political interference through transparent mechanisms to ensure that India's actions are not obscured behind the secrecy of diplomacy or buried in domestic legal processes. Sikh diplomacy needs to utilise global forums to challenge international power imbalance. And then what it talks about, it goes on a lot about how India is deliberately using diplomacy and soft power to essentially bury its nefarious activities. In other words, it's getting up to all sorts of bad actions, its operations killing its opponents internationally, but then it's using its soft power, its enormous soft power at a high diplomatic level to make these stories essentially go away or just obfuscate, to hide them, to bury them. And what they're saying is now, with the establishment of the SFI, it's going to make it harder for India to do that. And for example, after the SFI complaint recently about India's activities, the UNHCR, the UN itself, was forced to allocate rapporteurs, as they call them, to investigate this, which then led on to this 16-page letter which set out in great detail what India had actually been up to. And this communication is not just a recognition of human rights violations, it is a legal and moral indictment of India's sustained efforts to crush Sikh political expression around the world. And it then says, for too long India has used its geopolitical leverage to suppress meaningful scrutiny of its actions, framing the Sikh struggle as terrorism. And this publication by the United Nations directly challenges this narrative. So already it's undermining India's credibility. And this is where the work of SFI becomes imperative. The leadership is made up of recognised Khalistani leadership from around the world who've pushed this work for decades. Individuals who've been exiled from their homeland due to their direct participation in the ongoing support for the Sikh struggle in Khalistan. International forums like the United Nations or the Human Rights Council must be leveraged to confront the underlying power dynamics that perpetuate injustice in order to proactively move towards political solutions. And this again is all about ensuring that the small voice of the Sikh community cannot be buried by these larger organisations, where in the past, historically, these large organisations that have essentially been promoted by the West, they can't then be used by India to deliberately bury the voice, the small voice, relatively small voice of the Sikh community. The Federation has created an opening for further legal and diplomatic actions that expose Indian violence while centering Sikh aspirations for sovereignty. And this is just the beginning. SFI's work is a constant reminder that our fight is not about seeking approval or recognition from others, but about proactively asserting our rights and aspirations using every method and tactic permitted by Guru Sahib. It's imperative that Sikhs around the world take steps to develop collective leadership structures beyond the direct grasp of the Indian state in our pursuit for the establishment of Khalistan. As this region becomes increasingly important in economic, military, social and political terms, the Guru Khalsa Panth must be organised as a global stakeholder in order to proactively participate in shaping the future of the region and broader world order, rather than simply being used as a bargaining chip by other powers. So this is the Sikh community stretching its muscle now on the global stage. This is what the SFI are about. It means it's saying, right, we're going to take on these international organisations like the United Nations and the Human Rights Commissions, and we're going to stand on that same platform, and we are going to legally and credibly bring down India's argument, undermine India's credibility by providing evidence, and therefore we're going to say we're going to use your own methods, your own tactics, and your own legal framework to establish our nation so that we can be recognised as being as equals on the world stage as India, as any other nation within the United Nations. That's what it's all about. And as it said here, this is just the beginning, James.
Absolutely. And it's got to be noted, Angus, that a lot of countries that have gone through the struggle for independence have gone through it, and there's been stages of violence, there's been stages of coups, there's been stages of diplomatic and peaceful process. And it's important to bring that up because with the Sikh movement for Khalistan, it is a very peaceful and democratic process, which at the end of the day, when Khalistan is respected and it becomes a sovereign nation, it will be able to reduce the timeline to build international trade relations, foreign diplomatic relations, and geopolitical relations, because the history shows that those nations that have done so peacefully and democratically are the ones that get a lot more respect immediately or very short term, as opposed to the ones who have done it through violence. It takes a lot longer for foreign nations to build a trust and a relationship with them. So I think that is very important to signify how amazingly peaceful the process is through the Khalistan movement, the international referendum, and how that's going to translate to success in a shorter term than it would through other means that we've seen other nations follow. And that just shows the amazing work of the entire movement involved in the search for a homeland for the Sikh people and Khalistan. And that is why, Angus, we look so forward to having a meal in the new nation when it happens.
Indeed, we absolutely do. And well done to Maninder and Prabhjot Singh, who, in fact, they were the authors of this article, but they themselves were present at the United Nations when they presented their case in front of the Human Rights Commission. And as they said, this is all about mobilising global support for Sikh sovereignty using every means and platform possible. So good luck to them. Well done to them for achievements so far. Small steps, but they are stepping stones to the establishment of Khalistan. Right, James, let us move on to our comments section. And wow, Bob Blackman. Yes, Bob Blackman, this character that we've talked about for a couple of days, this Conservative MP who's been a dreadful mouthpiece for the RSS. Now, Balvinder Jitnagi says, this is interesting, I didn't know this. Bob Blackman, the Conservative MP for Harrow East, is of Jewish heritage. I didn't know this. He's also known for his strong support for Jewish communities in the UK and abroad. But he himself identifies as a practicing Hindu. His wife is Hindu and is involved in both Jewish and Hindu community activities. Well, Balvinder, I think that actually explains an awful lot. And that very simple piece of information, I think, puts a whole new perspective and explains an awful lot about Bob Blackman's dreadful stance that he's been spouting in Parliament about, James.
Yeah, exactly, Angus. And I mean, before you started the reports on Bob Blackman, I had no idea who this guy is. I mean, the name sounds like a villain from an old Western, spaghetti Western or something. So yeah, I'm learning myself as we go, not only about his links to Hinduism, but about him as a politician and I'll use the term loosely, but as a human.
Yeah, and all he's missing now is a black suit and a black coat, and we can start booing him every time he appears on stage, so he really has become a bit of a pantomime villain. And now Guvi Yul follows up with, Bob is well known for his paid hatred against Sikhs, but now this is an interesting take. Well done to the Sikh Muppets that gave much needed media attention to a flop of a film. Who the hell thinks these moronic actions up? And TC actually, agrees, says, look, actually that's a good point. This has just played right into their dirty hands in their favour. We scored a bit of an own goal here. And then app title for the show, though, appreciates the India's Useful Idiots title. Yeah, and I think this is an interesting perspective, actually. We of course, have taken the moral high ground on this, saying, absolutely, well done to the protesters for protesting against this film emergency we're talking about. But actually, Govt does actually wade in saying, hang on a second, maybe this actually wasn't such a good idea, because all it has done is it has played into the hands of India's right-wing media, saying, look at these terrorists wading into public cinemas and disrupting normal democratic free speech, blah, blah, blah. It's given them ammunition. I think that's actually quite an interesting perspective on this, James. I actually wouldn't disagree with it to some degree. Oops, you still there, James, or are you on mute?
I must have hit my keyboard. That mutes the mic. Yeah, so I think on both sides it's created a media storm, but an awareness there. So it can be manipulated either way, just like AI can, Angus.
Absolutely. And talking about AI, Mark Velber says Jinping developed DeepSeek and Modi G. All he's developed is Hindutva cow poo. But then Ashar, one of our critics, waits and says, oh, what have you developed then? But Balvinderjit Nagy comes back with a great comment. Well, actually, we developed a great religion that Hindutva seem to want to claim. Look at what the word Hindu means. Yeah, and how often, James, have we said, look, Hindus are always, our critics, or the Sikh critics are always wading in saying, well, you Sikhs, you're actually Hindus. The Sikhs are part of Hindus. Well, as Balvinderjit says, well, if you want to claim Sikhs, we are actually a great religion. So you're acknowledging what a great religion Sikhism is. So I'd say that's a bit of an own goal.
Absolutely, and let's not insult the cow poop. I mean, come on! It, unlike Modi, has a purpose. It can be used to fertilize fields.
There is that, James. Always a positive spin on such things. Well done. And Jasleen comes in and says, when we talked about Chandra Araya, well, he crashed just like his namesake, Chandrayaan-2, which in fact actually did crash land on the moon. Sadly, I have to say, and it looks like Chandra Araya has crashed in the same way. Right, Critics Corner.
Yay!
Hellbender. What is exactly this right-wing agenda, I guess, that we're talking about? White does not mean you are right. What is your link with India? Well, okay. Well, the right-wing agenda, I think we talk about it regularly. I don't need to regurgitate what this right-wing agenda is that we talk about on a regular basis. Go watch our old shows if you really want to know what the answer to that is. Yeah. White does not mean you are right. Yes, you're absolutely right, Hellbender. Just because we're white, it doesn't mean we're right. All we care about is the truth. We often report the truth from people of every colour, creed, religious, ethnicity, whatever you want to call it. And I don't understand why you're bringing race into this. One has to ask the question, why? I guess you're referring to white supremacy or something. Well, I don't think you'll find much white supremacy on this channel, as we are literally standing up on a daily basis for the Sikh community and other minorities, whether that's Islam, whether that's the Buddhists, the Jains, whatever. We stand up for all religions, all backgrounds. All we stand up against is fascism, is extremism, wherever it happens. I would say our colour of our skin has nothing to do with it. And what is our link with India? We are lovers of India. We love the Indian people, we love its culture, we love everything it stands for, except right-wing extremism, James. That's all we exist for. We exist to promote the Sikh community's agenda, its issues, highlight the issues, and to stand up against injustice, as indeed that is what the Sikh community stands for.
And thank goodness for this viewer, because otherwise I would have been confused. I didn't realize how white I was.
And living in the Northern Hemisphere, we're that white because we don't see the sun that much. It's as simple as that. So. Right, Venus, great comment this. What kind of divisive channel is this? Sikhs or anyone else don't need this mouthpiece. These communities can speak for themselves. Well, actually, Venus, they do speak for themselves. They try to speak for themselves, but when they do it in India, they get sent to prison. There is no free press in India. Haven't you realised this? And when it comes to divisive channel, no, actually, we're not divisive. All we're doing is highlighting the truth. The fact is we're highlighting who is divisive. This Hindutva agenda is divisive. And if you're a regular viewer of our show, you will understand why. We explain why Hindutva is so divisive, and why, more importantly, why is it so divisive? That's what we point to. That's what we're all about, James, is it not?
Absolutely. And again, if the person that makes the comments goes back and watches some of the old shows, they'll really understand that and see it. But again, there are people that just watch a few minutes of a program online and decide that they know all about it and, and want to make their judgments on it publicly known.
And Sufty Muffins responds with, how, when, where? I mean, a look of complete bemusement, which I think I can join you on that one. And Amakaira actually comes with a great comment. Yeah, they can speak for themselves and will continue to do so. Yes, there are loads of Punjabi channels. I come across so many informative videos which hit the nail on the head in Punjabi. English people have no idea what they're talking about. And then, of course, and the reason that we exist is to educate and inform. We're actually highlighting the issues of the Sikh community in English language and to hopefully a broader audience outside the Sikh community, and explaining to those outside the community what it's all about, what those yellow Khalistani flags stand for. And the trouble is that many English-speaking outlets parrot the Gaudiya media. They get their information from the Gaudiya media, which of course is anti-Khalistan, it is anti-Sikh, it is pro-Modi, it is pro-Hindutva, it is pro-RSS. So we are a counter-narrative to that. That is why we exist. And thank you, Amakaira, for claiming that you and I, James, are legends. I'm very flattered by that.
I know, right? Imagine that, but it just shows that there's a different perspective. That's why the show is called that, but different perspectives from different people. And of course, we are not for everybody. There are some people that are just not going to like us, and that's okay, because I don't like everybody. That's why I've taken to pets in my older age, because, the older you get, the less you like people.
Well, there is that. So I have to say thank you to Hellbender and Venus for your comments. They're interesting comments. Here's a few chuckles. Jaspar Bajwa. Dear Angus and James, please correct the spelling of Sikhs or Sikhs. On your homepage, you've written Sikh, not Sikh. I did look for this. I couldn't find it. It's certainly not on our YouTube homepage. Maybe it's on our webpage. Thank you for pointing that out. James, I don't think have you found that anywhere?
I didn't notice that, no. And I'm just wondering if you could actually maybe give us a bit more context, copy and paste maybe the paragraph or give us a bit more direction.
Yeah, send us an email at message@satellitetv.com if you just point to where that is. I think maybe it's the webpage. But so the problem we often have is when it comes to subtitles or anything that's AI generated, when we say the word Sikh, as in Sikh, it automatically refers it to S-I-C-K. So if it's AI generated, that's where that's come from. If it's anything that we've written, we certainly would have written S-I-K-H. So, but anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Human says, time to ban India-based news outlets for misinformation campaign. It would do a lot of good for the world. Yeah, I think this is absolutely right. Interestingly, of course, outlets like us, Satluj, we are banned in India, as are many other channels like us who like to bring the truth to our audience. And we are banned within India for a very good reason, as the Gaudiya media and, of course, the BJP government don't want the Indian population to find out the truth. Otherwise, the Indian population might realise just what's actually going on in their country. Why don't we respond in kind in the West? Why don't we ban Indian media? Actually, there is an argument to do that. But we have freedom of speech here in the West. We have free press. We actually allow propaganda, saying, well, okay, that is your right to spout propaganda. So we tend, on the whole, not to ban news outlets. We only ban them if they are terrorist organisations, whatever. But other than that, we're full of propaganda outlets. Now, I'll just caveat that with one hypocritical piece of information, which I noticed a while ago. Here in the UK, we used to get Russia Today broadcast on many of our outlets, on our cable outlets, our Freeview outlets. So there was, it was a Russian propaganda channel. It was always quite fun to watch. It was, a lot of it was outrageously, I have to say, funny propaganda. It was great. It was a great entertainment show. And a lot of it was actually quite interesting because, again, it did offer a very interesting counter-narrative to the Western agenda. And of course, we're fed a lot of propaganda here in the West as well. We are aware of that. So it's very important we see a counter-narrative, which is why Russia Today was always very interesting. Now, since the Ukraine war, Russia Today has been banned from the UK. That to me is hypocritical. That to me smacks of an agenda. It's very clear, very obvious what the agenda is. I object to that. If I live in a democracy, I want to hear what Russia have got to say about it. I want to read their or watch their propaganda, because then I can I'm grown up with hopefully a couple of brain cells. I can make up my own mind about what the truth is, and it's usually in between the two. So, but I can only do that. I can only form my opinion if I can see the other side's opinion. I am being prevented from that, and I'm calling out the UK for that, for absolute hypocrisy in a so-called democracy, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And a very clear, I'll give you a very clear example is that I was over in Ukraine just months after the war started to cover as a journalist. The hotel I was at had not only disconnected the cable vision to the TV, they actually removed the power cable to the TV, so I couldn't watch the local news as to what was going on. I was there. I mean, I saw bombings. I was awakened by the air raids. I was feeling the ground shaking under me. I was able to see explosions and dead bodies, but I wasn't allowed to watch the local news.
Yeah.
So it just shows that, and I think that, as you said, it's very important to have that counterbalance. And I think that at the end of the day, it's healthy because it also encourages more dialogue, more conversation, and people to get more information on the different topics.
Totally, and as they often say, the first casualty in war is the truth, and that's very much the case. Certainly, that's happened in Ukraine. I don't believe anything that comes out of Ukraine anymore, any news, because it's so clearly propaganda or biased or fake. It's very hard to find out the actual truth. And but when it does, and this is the thing, an outside war zone, just generally speaking, in terms of news and political opinions, and this very much is relevant to India, and it doesn't happen in India, is there's this idiom that's often spouted, and I use it regularly, is that I might not agree with your opinion, but I will fight to the death for you to be able to have the ability to speak out your opinion. In other words, I might not agree with you, but for God's sake, I will fight to defend your right to say it, because otherwise we don't have freedom of speech. And that is what we all stand for, James. That is what we as a channel stand for. Again, that's why I invite our critics to have a go at us or disagree with us, because absolutely I will defend your right to criticise us and disagree with us. That is the fundamental principles of freedom of speech, James.
Absolutely, and an oath we take as journalists to protect that right and to report on facts, not on fiction. And it's very important for everybody to have the right to express themselves, regardless as to whether we agree or not.
Absolutely, and we might be wrong. The truth is, we might be wrong on some things, and if we're wrong, tell us about it. Let us know, and we'll admit we're wrong. It's all about learning the truth. And final comment to wrap up the show. It comes from Rip My Name Rip. Says, Scott and James, I always listen to you. I like your programmes. Thanks. That's just a simple, lovely comment just to finish off. And it just gives me an opportunity on behalf of James and myself to say thank you to each and every one of our commenters. We do get loads of really, really supportive comments. Even if you're not even making a point, you just say thank you or appreciate the show. We do read those, and they really do mean an awful lot to us. So thank you very much indeed for those. Do we not, James?
We do, very much so, and we appreciate people taking the time to actually interact with us through the comments, because it just shows another level that you understand that you are as valuable to us as maybe the information is to you, and we really appreciate you being a part of the show.
Absolutely, we do. So please do keep those comments coming in, and as always, we always do appreciate particularly the educational comments, the ones give us information we might not know about, or giving your perspective on some of the items that we cover. So do keep those coming in as well. Right. Don't forget, you can of course message us directly at message@satellage.tv.com if there's any you'd like to send us directly. But otherwise, that is the end of another show for the week, and thanks so much for watching Perspectives. We will catch you next time. Don't forget our podcast, which will be released tomorrow. It's going to be a fascinating one. Do keep your eyes out for that one. But in the meantime, it is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You've been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.